Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly and I'm a mixed media artist who specializes in gouache paint, ink work, and sometimes I do digital painting. Alright, so in this week's video, I'll be working on a still life. In this video, I get it most of the way done, but there's definitely going to be a part 2. In this part though, we're going to be going over how I get it to that level of completion. So stay tuned and let's get into it. Alright, so if you know, you know. In a lot of my videos, I start my paintings off with watercolor pencils. I like to do this especially for paintings that have a lot of fabric or really strange abstract shapes going on, because I feel like I have a lot more control over carving out those details that can be very easy to mess up because they're abstract shapes, right? When you look at a cloth, it's going to have wrinkles that are just random weird shapes. I feel like I have more control over it when I'm able to start the painting like a drawing. So watercolor pencils are essentially what they sound like. They are colored pencils, and once there's water introduced to them, they turn into watercolor. I started the background off with a purple watercolor pencil, and I focused more pigment in areas where I know there's going to be a deeper, darker shadow, kind of like the drop shadow from the deer skull, kind of near the antler area where there's also a fabric fold there. But I also included a little bit of pigment in areas where there's going to be highlights. I also used a yellow ochre watercolor pencil for the deer skull base. I also used a turquoise watercolor pencil for the shadows around the skull. White tends to reflect a lot of surrounding colors that are happening. If there's cool lighting from a window, which is happening in this instance, as well as a studio light on the other side, it tends to reflect that cooler natural light wherever it's receiving that. I live in Washington, so we get a lot of what I like to call neon gray lighting. It's when the sun is out, but you can't see it. It's because it's all overcast, so all the gray clouds are just bright. Like, you still need to use sunglasses, but it looks like there's no sun, essentially. And it results in this cool toned natural light. The reason why I did purple for the shadows and the fabric in the background, as well as the goblet and the candlestick glass, is because the fabric that's the backdrop is this wine color, and depending on the lighting, it shifts what it looks like a lot. My students actually had to do a fabric study to learn how to control gradients in order to create accurate shadows and highlights. Depending on how they photographed this exact cloth, some of them looked more coral, some of them looked really dark burgundy, wine red, so it definitely has that undertone. And like I said, there's two sources of light in this painting. One that is a window and the other that is a studio lamp, which has a filter over the lamp itself that is this kind of rosy hue to it, and the purple kind of adds to that wine color. Now you might notice when I did a base coat of watercolor across the whole span of the painting, I was doing a wet on wet method, and this really helps to prep the gouache paint before I go in with that medium at all. I like to start with watercolor, especially in areas of study that involve a lot of smooth blending, a lot of soft gradients, like in this instance, a fabric backdrop, right? What I like to do is first put down a lot of water everywhere, and then I choose the color of the material that I'm painting, and just let the water kind of do its thing, let it blend. As you can see, I'm adding another layer of that right here to the background to really punch up the saturation in that cloth, and it does all the blending on its own. And what happens is when you do this kind of method, not only do you get these soft gradients, but then when you go in with gouache paint on top of that, you can blend the gouache paint into this layer if you want to, depending on how wet your brush is. And you don't have to rely on just gouache paint and doing a bunch of feathering and a lot of blending to get the similar effect. So that's why I like to use the two mediums together. I mean, they're practically the same medium. Gouache paint is just watercolor with a lot more pigment, right? That's essentially the whole difference. Then on the other layers where I have to get more precise and detailed, I let the whole illustration board completely dry before I go in with this more detailed application. I'm still doing watercolor just to keep my layers thin. You want to start with thinner layers, and then as you get more detailed, then you apply less water, you get more detailed, you tend to have a thicker application of paint, right? So I'm still using watercolor in some areas, specifically the goblet and the candlestick holder. I went in with a brush that has watercolor, but it's a little bit more pigmented watercolor. And on a dry surface, that's where I etched out all those harsh shadows and reflections that are being reflected in that glass. Because if I were to apply that on a wet surface, it would just bleed and completely disperse throughout, which was great for, you know, the first layer. That's what I wanted to make, but not when you want to get that harsh edge, you know what I mean? Right here, I'm going back in with watercolor pencils simply because they're approachable, especially for parts of the painting that are a little bit spooky, okay? The nose area of the deer skull has so many layers. There are so many different layers that are very precise, and they're these weird organic shapes. When I start looking at it, my eyes are kind of like, what am I even looking at? Like, what? And I find that if I draw it out rather than paint it, I feel like I just have more control. Maybe because I've been drawing more than I've been painting. I mean, I've been drawing since I was 4, so it makes sense. I don't know. But that is why I went back in with the watercolor pencils. However, I do also use the watercolor pencils in instances where I don't necessarily want to revive the gouache or watercolor that I already placed down by changing the color a little bit. Sometimes there's areas where I'm like, that is the right local color, but there needs to be a tint of blue or green over the top of it. And that's what the watercolor pencils are so good for, is just applying almost like a digital painting. If you're familiar with digital painting, it's almost like you have a second layer on top on a lower opacity. That's how I use the watercolor pencils sometimes. It's just blending different subtle color shifts without having to make an insane amount of paint mixtures. It's lovely. And it really does help with items such as this deer skull. You can see this ivory color. It reflects a lot of different colors. It's not just a cream ivory color. It has some burnt sienna in there. There's yellow ochre. There's some ultramarine. There's some turquoise. You know, there's a lot of different shifts going on, and not to mention a lot of these tend to be on the complementary side of things, so those colors mixed together create muted colors, and I just find that I have an easier time with creating these subtle color shifts with watercolor pencils, reviving it with water. I don't know. I just feel like it's a lot more approachable, and you kind of get this pearly iridescent effect to it, which I really love.
Oh, that's real good.
Now for the glass reflections, really, truly, all I can say is, I know I just said this in a video, literally a video I just edited. You guys may have already seen it. Make your eyes blurry. Look at the subject matter out of focus before getting into all the details, because listen, I know I love detail and I love the shiny things. So when I look at a picture of a candlestick that has all these reflections going on, there's 2 different light sources, there's so many random weird shapes going on in the reflections, it gets overwhelming. Just blur your eyes, or better yet, take the reference image, literally put it into Procreate and slap on a blur filter. That will help you easily establish the base colors and then get more detailed with each layer. And that's what I'm doing right here with gouache paint. You can see the warmer studio light is on the left, not just from the skull, but also in the candlestick. You can see that one face on the glass has more of a yellow reflection, and then on the other side you see more of that overcast light coming through the window that's bouncing off of there. Now glass can be very tricky. Again, just put it in a blur filter or look at it with your eyes out of focus. It will really help you with getting the basic colors down and slowly build up each of those abstract shapes with each layer. Okay, so if that candlestick wasn't crazy enough, we're now going towards the goblet. Now, by the end of this video, the goblet isn't 100% done, but it's pretty dang close. This goblet is, I forget what the collection is, but it's from my wedding. And they're very, very detailed. They have a lot of facets and etching in them. The circles in the center, you can see I made those little grid marks for each of these little square facets that are carved out in this kind of garnet colored glass going on here. And I later found out that that was not the best idea. You can see with the rest of the glass, I am getting the base color and shading before even getting into the detail. However, with that center circle area, I thought I was doing the good thing by blocking it out, and that wasn't the good thing, because you can see the reflection on the other side of the glass through that area, and I realized it's probably better I flatten this first, get the general lighting, and then go in and create those square facets on there. So that's what I'm doing here. Especially because the goblet and the still life, it looks like it's glowing from within. It looks like it's glowing red within, and the more shaded areas of the glass with higher opacity, similar to the backdrop cloth, it turns into this purple wine color, which was actually the theme of our wedding. So, and also the fabrics are altar cloth. I still for the ceremony, I still use it. I bring it into classes. It's a really good it's a beautiful cloth. But anyways, I'm getting distracted. So that's what I did there. And you can also see I'm adding some warmer red colors, but I'm also creating these muted violet colors, and that's from the goblet getting some of that overcast lighting that's a lot more cool toned, bouncing off the side of the glass there. Next, I'm just working on the background, applying some gouache paint on some areas where I feel like the saturation needed to be punched up a bit, and to also give the paint some fuller opacity. As you can see, I'm still able to achieve a somewhat smooth gradient across a large area of the illustration board because of that underlying watercolor base layer that I made. After that, I'm carving out some more of the deeper shadows that are in between the ripples of the fabric. I'm also adjusting some of the shadows on the more shallow wrinkles in the fabric, like to the left of the goblet. There's a slight dip in the fabric that creates a very shallow shadow right there. I also made sure to deepen the shadows underneath the skull. I'm adjusting the lighting on the sides of those wrinkles there because of that warmer light source from the studio lamp to the left of the composition. So the left side of all of those fabric wrinkles are going to have more of an orangey hue to the red, whereas on the right side of all of those wrinkles there's going to be more of a purple leaning red. To totally smooth out the gouache paint even more, I am applying some red crimson colored watercolor paint on top, just to ensure that all of the edges of the fabric in the softer lit areas are going to be completely smooth. Specifically the corner I'm working on right there on the left of the goblet. I really wanted to make sure that was totally smooth because it's such a shallow wrinkle in the fabric, and the highlight and shadow area doesn't change that much in value, about a couple steps, and it's more so a shift in saturation. So I'm just adjusting that with some watercolor because I don't want a very thick application of paint, a very opaque layer of pigment layered on top. I already built up the gouache paint. Everything looks good. I just wanted to really smooth and blur on a second layer of the painting with some watercolor to totally tint that. I probably could have used some watercolor pencils for this, but there needed to be more water involved to totally revive the layers underneath and really smooth that out. So that's why I opted for watercolor instead of watercolor pencils. And then I'm just adjusting the saturation throughout the whole painting because the red really does shift from this very vibrant red into these dustier violet burgundy hues. And that shift in saturation is what totally sells the lighting in this painting. So I would say that this painting is 95% done. I don't know where I pulled that percentage of, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm just judging it from vibes and experience. But I will say this, the next video I will be going into more detailed explanations as to what I'm doing. There was a lot to cover in this painting. There's so much going on. I probably could have sectioned this out with each subject matter. If you would like me to do that with my paintings in the future, let me know. You know, I could probably segment this out and do a whole video just on how I did the glass. In the next video, I'm going to be going over how I'm going to paint that Black Widow spider on top of the skull. I'm also going to go over more of the details in the red goblet because it's mostly done. I just need to do the fine details in that cup right there. And finally, on the candle, I do plan on having some smoke, kind of like someone blew out the candle. I would like some smoke to go across the composition of the page and go off the illustration board out of frame, just to make it look fancy and cool. I love painting smoke. It's one of my favorite things to paint. So I actually have a tutorial on how to do that, how to paint smoke with gouache paint. I can link that here if you would like. Anyways, that is this week's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If there's anything you would like to see in the future from my channel, please let me know in the comments down below. And if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing, and I will see you next week. Bye!